We do have one open recommendation that we're going through this committee, and that is recommendation 355. That was regarding the budget, pension, and scope, our ad hoc committee. And that being said, I think we have 0 pending. We do have a very light draft in the works. Basically, we had discussed in our last committee about making a recommendation to have our IPL letter accompany any budget appeals or requests for additional funding to support the pension recommendation. And that being said, let's just keep moving along here. That makes us ready for our DOESR update.
I know that he knew about the meeting. I haven't heard from him today specifically, though, so I'll have to check and see what's up with Zach.
Okay. Maybe he's meeting his wife for his medicine. Sorry, I can make fun because I was the one in pain. Okay, so that being not said, we can go right into committee discussion. Go ahead.
David Bottoms, Cap. Before you move on, can we just talk about where we are on this minibus bills that include energy and water, which we heard had moved on to conference committee at the last full board meeting. Actually, the conference committee meeting was canceled. It was scheduled for July 12th, I believe, and it was canceled. And so they're still trying to, from what I understand, still trying to work out some details on that. And one of them being, from what I understand, Yucca Mountain, so which affects the energy and water bill. Those are the appropriations bills. So there's, at this point, the conference committee has not done anything on the minibus bills, which includes the energy and water, military construction, veterans affairs, something else is in there too. So.
Okay. Did we have questions or concerns on that, Dave?
Well, just that it came up at the meeting that it had moved on to the conference committee, and that the conference committee was it was going to be in conference. It is not. It has not been in conference. That meeting was canceled. So, and there's been no schedule.
No reschedule.
The House was in recess for the month of August, pretty much. So, or
so I'm assuming you follow those pretty closely, because I don't. I do. I don't want to pretend that I do. So from
just a bad habit from my previous.
No, I like the habit. So from your perspective, how's it impacting us? Just from stagnation of funding coming our way, or?
Well, there's if there's no conference agreement reached, then we may end up with a CR. But the president has said that, and if all the bills are packaged together in what they call an omnibus, then the president has said he won't sign an omnibus. So I guess things are up in the air right now.
Okay, so a continuing resolution will still kind of stymie the Department of Energy's ability to long-term plan.
But the president has also said that he will not, does not want a continuing resolution. So, and that a government shutdown may be a good thing. So.
Okay. All right, so moving into our discussion topics. James, we didn't have discussion topics on the recommendation 355. And forgive me, but I do not recall our final determination out of the full cab.
You decided that you were going to talk about it at the full board meeting on the first day, and you could vote to close it as a group then.
Okay.
Or move it to closure on the second day.
Okay.
With the rest of the
So
votes.
other than us sponsoring that particular recommendation in that committee, we don't really have any further actions on this committee for it?
Not for that particular topic, no.
Okay.
I mean, you can talk about it if you want to. We can pull it up and have a pre-conversation now.
Well, since I guess we could just take a moment if there were any feedback comments on the response from DOE. I know they more or less agreed with it, and
We pull up the response to
wasn't on our agenda, so let's do a little ad lib here. So I think out of this committee, though, I don't think there were any specific concerns about the responses. They more or less accepted it in whole. And then, as I stated, just the one recommendation that we'd like to have wrapped up well in advance of our next IPL letters to make sure that recommendation is discussed at length, but I'm not prepared to discuss that tonight because I've
Okay.
been preoccupied. Could you go back to the work plan? So our July work plan was to have the Price-Anderson Act, which we did have a presentation on that, and also was calling for community reorganization. Has that been rescheduled
Rescheduled for September.
to September? Okay,
Yep.
perfect. All right, so we do have that coming up, and we have the Savannah River National Lab update and funding. As you recall, we had a recent recommendation with regards to that funding. So the suggestion was to have it on its own separate PBS, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas there's pros and cons to all of that, and it's considered on an annual budget basis as to what makes the most sense for the site. Anyone have any questions on the work plan or anything that was tabled on any of that? Okay, so moving into our committee discussion, we had the one presentation, the Price-Anderson Act and the NQA1 standards. Just going to check my notes again. So really, just trying to get some of the conversation going here. As we recall what was presented, really this is the guiding foundation of some of the activities governing the site. And there was a discussion on the side at the full cab as a possible recommendation coming out of this, that the cab be provided with report summary of contractor scorecards and performance. Some of the act, obviously it does cover a whole lot of activities, but there was questions with regards to the prior stand down. If you all remember when H Canyon had to shut down due to issues moving some plutonium. Was it
2015.
I'm sorry?
2015. 2015 is when that occurred.
Was it that long ago? Seems like yesterday. And I had one comment on that. Were there any fines doled out from that stand down and the results?
So this is Mike McLance, DOE. I should know that, but I don't.
I don't think there were,
There
because
was-
I think we asked this before, but it was a little bit early in the investigation.
There was an enforcement action on it, and they had a consent decree or consent order issued by under PAAA, but I don't recall. I'll have to get you the answer to that if you're interested in it. They did have some corrective actions to take in regards to their criticality safety programs to make sure that they have them independently assessed and some improvements to be made. But I'd have to get back to you on it specifically.
Okay, thank you. Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, Cab. This is for my edification. Are we in a position to make a recommendation based on the information in the contractor scorecard and performance, or is that just for our knowledge?
It was a sidebar conversation. I think Gil was involved and a few other people that part of, what was observed out of the Price-Anderson Amendment Act presentation, that it would be kind of natural evolution of what we've learned, and to maybe look at how the contractors themselves are performing from a CAB point of view. So you probably read the updates that we received when the contractors received their awards, that they have incentives baked into the contract for performance criteria, I'm assuming timeliness, safety, other things. And I know that's all you would, Dave, you might know a little bit more of the details because you probe into those public records, but I personally don't. So out of that discussion, that was the possible recommendation that was discussed. So if we as a committee feel that that's a way we would like to go, then we would just need to speak amongst ourselves and who would help start coordinating that, putting it together.
Okay.
So how do you feel, Joyce?
I literally have no idea what you just said. I heard the words and they did not compute. I'm sorry.
Would you like to write a recommendation?
On what? That's what I'm not clear on.
Asking the DOE to provide summary reports on the contractor's scorecards.
But why? That's where I'm not clear. Why do I want that? Why do we want that?
Well, speaking from kind of the analytical management side, you wouldn't mind seeing that. And I know DOE does a great job of monitoring that because it's part of their contracts. But what we as a CAB don't, I feel, potentially digest from it is how well are they performing? How much monies are actually being withheld or awarded to the contractors for their performance?
Okay. And then what are we going to do with that? Like, it's just for education purposes. Is what that's why I'm not clear on. Like, why would we just to know? Is that what our recommendation would be? We want to know, so let's know.
Well, if someone was performing poorly, it's why.
There, that's what I was not clear on. Okay, thank you.
So it could certainly be money constraints. In a severe twist, it could be how they're managed. It could be how they're performing in general, any sort of culture taking root.
Okay, now I understand. Now it's all become clear. So back to my question about are we in a position to take that information and use it to make a recommendation? If we wrote the recommendation you're talking about and got that information, would we then be able to use that information to say the CAB feels that it is in the department's best interest not to use X, Y, and Z contractors because this document says X? Or would it just end at us either getting or not getting that information?
Well, certainly whatever the information we received, we'd have to act upon. If they said yes and provided a presentation on the summary of what's been awarded, then we would it would be like any presentation we receive. It's whatever comes out of that presentation material that it sparks additional questions or different lanes to question and proceed.
Right. I guess what I'm asking is, are we in a position to tell them who they shouldn't hire as a contractor? Are we in a position to put input on how they come about acquiring a contractor? That's what I want to know.
I'm not so sure that they would, that actual contractor selection is not in our purview for sure.
Right.
No.
Okay.
I mean, we could, in essence, if we saw what they were awarded for, and let's say we didn't agree that they should have received a dime for, you know, they should have been in, just using an example without speaking any true facts behind it, if we said that the cost of shutting down H Canyon should have been detracted from any award they got that year, that would be a potential recommendation for future
Okay.
contracts
I see.
to put more onus on the subcontractors, or if we see it that they're not incentivized enough to proceed with work and get the job done quicker to our liking. So there's a
Okay.
couple avenues that it could go, but we're not going to really tell them who and
Okay.
Well,
That's what I was not clear on. Like, we're not going to take this information and say, Acme Contracting Company did poorly, so don't hire them anymore. But what we can say is this, that, and the other led to Acme Contracting Company not performing well, so you need to make them have a better environment in which to perform well.
so currently contractor performance isn't something that's really on your work plan. And that might be something that we could talk about at the next work plan meeting and seeing if that's something the department really wants their feedback on. You know, they've identified these topics here, but something you feel strongly about,
Mhm.
let me know and we can have
Well,
a separate conversation
That's
with
just
your
why we're talking this
DFOs.
through, because
Yeah.
this was put through by people that were on and not on this committee, and as an idea, like anything we have as an idea, we just have to speak through it to see if that's where we want to go.
And I
Just
think-
like we did with the budget constraints with the retirees. That's certainly we can't drive a whole lot of that. But there is a lot of information that's good for the public to understand, and that one came with some reasonably strong recommendations to say, hey, we really have to do things to supplement our budget to cover those costs. We can't have this stagnant budget or these small incremental improvements that we've had in the past. It's going to take something substantial so we can keep doing the EM mission.
I see. I'm not trying to, like,
No,
detract. It's a good idea. I just trying to conceptualize it for myself.
Any other thoughts on that potential going forward? I'm not seeing a lot of interest yet, but nor am I looking to court interest on it. It just was an idea someone had. Mary, you were in legal, weren't you? Or still are? Was? You're a retired lawyer, right? Yes. Okay. So a lot of, obviously, the Price-Anderson Amendment Act is a bit of legalese to some lay people. Did anything strike you that, I mean, to me, it's just a legal guideline. I mean, that has some teeth. Right. Anyone else have any feedback or comments on the presentation itself? David?
Dave Babakis, Cab. One thing I was interested in is that I had heard that it protects the environment, health, and safety of public workers and the contractors, the subcontractors, and the suppliers. But my question, and I don't know that I understood how these people were protected, but visitors to the site, DOE employees, EPA, Forestry Service, South Carolina DHEC, how are they protected when they're out there doing their work? So.
We don't have a resident expert on this tonight, do we?
No, it would appear not.
Mike Michelangelo, DOE. I can probably answer some of those questions depending upon, I'm qualified as a senior technical safety manager for the Department of Energy, and this is one of the topical areas that we have to have a working level knowledge of. So up to a point, I can probably help. I was going to talk to both you, Dan, and Dave after this. I've contacted the manager for the point of contact for this committee and trying to find out what's going on so that we would have had the right people here, but unfortunately I don't have any answers for you on that, but I can help you with some specific questions on PAAA if you've got them, and I'll ask you to rephrase exactly what your question was, because I'm not sure I completely understood it.
Well, the Price-Anderson Amendment Act,
Mm-hmm.
from what I understand, it protects contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers. But under that umbrella, visitors, DOE employees, EPA, Forestry Service, South Carolina DHEC, they're not considered contractors, subcontractors, or suppliers. And the presenter, I guess, alluded to the fact that they were protected and they would be indemnified again, for losses some other way.
Mm-hmm. So Mike Michelangelo, Price-Anderson, and I'm going to quibble on a couple words. When you say protected, let me clarify. When protected, you use the word indemnifies. That's what PAAA does. It indemnifies our contractors, and it also provides an enforcement mechanism in order to be able to penalize contractors who aren't operating the way they're expected to. The reason they're indemnified under law is because they're expected to, because of the very nature of what they're working with, nuclear weapon generation and cleanup, et cetera, and nuclear working period, the cost of bad things happening will often be more risky than any private enterprise could afford to self-insure or so forth. So Price-Anderson was intended to indemnify them so long as they continue to operate within the regulations and requirements. So other agencies working like DHEC is another agency of the government. They're not going to create, all they do is monitor, so there's nothing they can go do that would need to be indemnified. The Forest Service does wood harvesting, timber harvesting for us. They manage the woodlands and a few other functions, but they're another branch of the government, so again, they're self-insured by the government. So if something were to happen, they're naturally, and I don't know how they work within their subcontracts, but we have a memorandum of agreement, or a memorandum of agreement, or a memorandum of understanding, I forget which one it is, between federal agencies, but we have something that lays out how their structure works with ours. So Price-Anderson per se for what we do doesn't apply to what they do, but they self-insure their own kinds of work. I think in the public, there's nothing the public can do that would cause an accident or incident or upset, so there's no need to indemnify anything that would happen. We protect them by keeping them out of the hazards where the public could be affected, and keeping the hazards away from where any member of the public would be allowed to go. Okay. Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
I'm not sure I understood exactly.
No, thank you for the clarification. I didn't understand exactly how it affected each of the different.
And Mike Michelangelo, it's a very difficult subject to wrap your brain around, because it took me several years working in the department before I really began to appreciate how much I didn't understand about it. I always viewed it as Price-Anderson, the mechanism for fining our contractors, but that's just one output of the PAAA machine. They look at pretty much, they'll screen, as Scott Nicholson had indicated during his presentation. The Price-Anderson group sees and reviews many of the upsets that happen on the sites for a determination that they make, not us, as to what they think they might want to go look at it a little bit harder to see if the upset condition was the result of not staying within the regulations, procedures, and policies that we, the government, rely upon our contractors to stay within in order to avoid bad things happening that would cost the government a lot of money to rectify.
Much clearer, thank you.
My pleasure. It's all part of the full service package.
Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, Cab, and I recognize that perhaps the person to best answer this is not here, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So they don't pay it out of their money, the government pays the fine? Does that ring a bell with anybody? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
Mike Michelanis, TV, yes, I do, and I'll have to take a look up on that because there are some things that the government does compensate our contractors for if they incur charges, legal fines, etc. The government will typically repay those. They're allowable charges under the contract. What's allowable under this contract in regards to paying for PAAA fines, I need to go back and consult a subject matter expert for that.
Well, my understanding, as I understood it at the meeting, was that the government was paying, so the contractor is being held accountable, but we're paying for their accountability as a governmental, whoever the government is. Is that
The government would be us, DOE.
right?
Let me get hypothetical. Even if the government did have to pay the fine that we levied upon themselves, which is kind of silly because that means we're charging the contractor and then the contractor charges us back again.
Right.
Even if monetarily it wasn't an impact to them, and that's what I'm going to pull the string to find out because I don't know that it really works that way. But let's say it did. Okay, so we're making up a possibly fictional case here. The damage to the impact, I won't say damage, the impact to the contractor's reputation is more substantive than the dollar amount. You can hit up, if a contractor gets $300,000 penalty, and that's a pretty substantial penalty, or even a couple $1 million penalty. I've seen some penalties in the millions of dollars depending upon the significance of it and how long they've gone and what the contractor has or has not done to self-report it or mitigate it. That really impacts their ability to compete for other work within the government. And in fact, if it's egregious enough, it might even get them barred from competition in future government work if your non-compliances with the requirements are that serious. So PAAA in and of itself, they'll be held accountable just because every single competition they apply for, that'll be something that's reviewed and understood by anybody who's asking for proposals to do government work.
Okay, thank you for the clarification because the way it sounded before is, okay, you broke my leg, now I have to pay you because you broke my leg.
No, so there is accountability in that respect. I'll have to find out in the how the accountability works financially. I recall the discussion. I don't recall what the answer specifically was. Unless Jim or someone else does, we'll take an action to get back to you on it.
All right, thank you.
Mike, is that basically because of the indemnity they have under the PAAA?
Mike Michelanis, DOE. The indemnity really is meant to be more of, okay, if a facility burned down, SRS would not have to go pay to rebuild it out of their own profits. The government would have to repair that. We would have to have it appropriated from Congress and make the repairs. If an earthquake were to occur on their watch and knock down a bridge on the site, contractor oversees what their subcontractors are doing, and we will sometimes go out with them to those facilities to watch how they're watching their people to make sure that they're doing what we're paying them to do and meeting the requirements that we've established for them to do under their program. Does that help?
Yes.
So I'm not a quality assurance person, but I did pass by a Holiday Inn a couple years ago.
That's a good one. As part of the NQA1 requirements, page 23 of the slideshow, number 18 was audits. So that's really the basis of almost any quality assurance program out there. So is that something that's of public record, is those audit findings?
All right, I'll take a look up on that one.
Okay.
Would you catch that one for me, please, James? That one I don't know.
And I guess maybe as a potential point of interest for the CAB, we might be interested in understanding if there were any failures of any of the primes to uphold the NQA1 standards, and then how it was remedied. That would be a
So,
slightly potential area we could get into, but
so Mike Michelan's theory, if there were it's interesting that, and I wasn't a part of putting this presentation together, but when I listened to it, I presume both subjects were presented at the same time, because quality assurance is the mechanism enforcement uses to apply all of their fines to. If you have a RECRA non-compliance with the storage drum on a true pad, let's say, if RECRA applied there, DOE's enforcement is not going to enforce a fine based on RECRA. They're going to define a fine in terms of 10 CFR 830 Part A, which is the quality assurance rule. Everything comes out of quality assurance. So if we had audits that showed a failure of a contractor's quality assurance program, I'm sure there would.
the contractor being more or less off the hook for financial penalties other than reputation, it becomes a little bit of concern to me. I can't name the companies by name that make up some of these conglomerates that are bidding on these packages, but from the casual observation that I've seen, it seems to be the same companies just reformulating amongst themselves, coming in as a new company name and bidding on the work. So it would seem to me that you'd have a lot of inbred issues if there is a track record with any of those organizations having failed audits and penalties assessed. They're not feeling the financial pinch because it's covered, yet even if they're socially disgraced beyond the point of getting the contract next time, they just disappear and reformulate and come back with the same people, different name.
Mike Michelan's theory, I understand that point completely, but I don't think it's as simple as any fines imposed get reimbursed by the government. I don't think it's that bright a line. There are some penalties, and I don't know if it's PAAA penalties, that, as I said, settlements in court over a hiring practice, let's say, if the contractor were sued for that, would likely be, from my knowledge, reimbursable under the contract. If the contractor willfully ignored quality assurance requirements associated with the storage and transport of transuranic waste, it would surprise me if that can be repaid by the government, if that's an allowable cost. But I need to, I'll go find the answer out to that and clarify, because I understand your confusion with it, and I don't believe it's just purely impacted reputation, but geez, maybe I'm wrong on that. We'll look that up and get back to you.
Yeah, I would suspect some of the fines certainly would carry through as, and if it was egregious, I think there'd be no holding back of what penalties they could receive. Doug, you had your card up.
Yeah, Doug Howard Cap. Mike, the ticker, it's going through some test controls now, right?
Mm-hmm.
The testing process. Now, are the folks from the Price Anderson, do they have folks there that observe that?
DOE Michelanis, no. Jim Folk's organization would be overseeing that. And we'll be watching how you're always going to have defects, or you always have the potential for unexpected issues when you're starting up and developing a new system. So no, PAAA would only get involved in that, probably not in the initial deployment of it, but if suddenly we found out halfway through it that one of the suppliers was substituting counterfeit materials from a third world country in contrary to what the specification said, that would get reportable under our environmental safety and health reporting requirements. And when that was reported, that would go up through a PAAA screening, and then the PAAA people would go look at that. But they don't normally deploy in anticipation of potential issues. They rely on the acronym is ORPS, and forgive me, I can't say exactly what that acronym stands for, but ORPS is our health and safety reporting system. There are criteria under 10 different areas that our contractors have to report things that occurred to the department's attention. The SRS, who was operating the canyon had an upset that was reported, and PAAA wanted to come and have a discussion with us to see whether it was linked back to the 2015, the issues that surrounded the shutdown in 2015. At the end of that, I believe, we haven't got their official answer back, but at the end of the discussions, they'll first talk to DOE to get our thoughts and feelings on the connection and what happened, and then they came out here and had a conference with our contractor and us where we shared with them what happened, what we knew, and that's how PAAA will work. They'll come in after the fact to look at something that occurred to make sure that that the operations that are being done are staying within the regulations and within the expectations that we establish in our contracts. Doesn't mean that there won't be defects and upsets. But not everything is fined, but when there are criteria that mitigate defects and mistakes. If, for example, self-reporting goes a long ways to not getting a PAAA fine. If the contractor self-reports an issue and takes proactive measures to mitigate the impacts of it, that goes a long ways to averting an enforcement action. Enforcement really is going after those contractors and trying to understand where contractors have not taken the appropriate internal oversight and controls to proactively find those kinds of things. Because every big company, every big corporation will have processes that aren't working exactly the way you're expecting them to, and we expect our contractors to do rigorous self-assessment, to have their own what we call contractor assurance programs to make sure that they root that stuff out before upsets occur.
So they're not going to come out unless they are notified, and even if there's a contractor that might have had a history of having issues with, I guess certain things that go on.
If Mike Michaelan's DOE, if a contractor had a history of quality assurance issues, that would not be an enforcement action. That would be a procurement action. That I would be very surprised if a company who had a lot of quality issues, quality will sort through that in procurement. And when it comes to us procuring for a major prime contractor, yes, we'll look at that too. We look at the parent company's history. There's a ton of factors that go into how we select a contract. So that's not an enforcement action, is more of a procurement thing to make sure we won't bring those types of folks aboard.
Thank you.
David, your card went up?
Dave Vavakis, Cap. I did jot down ORP's reports, what it stands for. It's Occurrence Reporting Processing System.
I would
Thank you,
never
Dave.
have guessed that.
I do know it's Order 232.1, I believe it is, but I could not remember what that stood for. I remember our directive system, and I'm very familiar with the criteria, but I could not remember the name. Thank you for that.
Joyce?
You guys are putting me through my paces tonight, aren't you?
Joyce Underwood Cab, and this is what separates the math people from the word people, because I couldn't remember that word to save my, or that number to save my life. Okay, and this might be really far afield, I don't know, and I'm just gonna ask. So, the Price-Anderson Act indemnifies the contractor if case something bad happens, right? So that they're not, it's like insurance.
Mike Michaelan's DOE, in general, yes. And
Okay.
it's not every bad thing that happens, because our contractor will go after its subs for the impacts of bad things that happen.
Right. So if a contractor, let's say Acme Contracting Company, was found to have been criminally negligent, like did something just horrible, I don't know what that is, but something awful, because the Supreme Court has more or less ruled that corporations are people, can that corporation be held criminally accountable, or does the Price-Anderson Act like absolve them of that? Like, what?
And if you look at some of the Weapons Complex Monitor is a media or journal that is specially, they pay attention to what goes on in the Department of Energy. I've been following for years. There's a number of criminal cases out at Hanford, for example, where certain managers have come up with fraudulent charges. they've adjusted time cards and submitted claims for money that they frankly weren't owed.
But does that fall under Price Anderson, or is that something else? Because that's not
No,
like a
if
quality
you, if
thing.
you do something criminally negligent like that, I don't believe, I'll take a look up on that one too. Price Anderson was meant to indemnify them from the consequences of things, because no matter how diligent the workers are, how well you train them, how much supervision you put out there, stuff happens. And if something happens and there's a large cost to the cleanup, and nuclear stuff can be pretty costly to go clean up and decontaminate it. If you look at Yucca Mountain, not Yucca Mountain, WIP. We had a fire in a transport vehicle, and then followed by a drum that overheated and released material, shut down a facility for 3 years. We're just now, the cost of that is in terms of millions of dollars. If the company operating,
Example, I didn't have a good example. So the canister that blew up, right?
Mhm.
If they could track it back to who made the mistake, is that person criminally liable?
if it was I'd have to,
Intentional.
if it was
It has to be
intentional
intentional.
and willful, I do believe there are points where Price Anderson does not apply, but I need to get someone who understands Price
Yeah, I'm
Anderson.
sorry, that was a
This
really
goes
complicated
beyond
question.
beyond my working level knowledge. No, it's a darn good question. Because the whole point of Price Anderson was not to hold the WIP contractor liable for the costs of having to shut down the facility because of a nuclear incident. And it wasn't, and I believe it's also there to indemnify the company that was operating at Los Alamos, for example, from a mistake that was made too. Now, if workers did that, what their criminal liability and penalties are, that if they'd done it intentionally, and I know this was not an intentional, willful, oh, let's go see if we can screw up WIP and shut it down. That's not what happened. But if someone were to be, well, I won't even expect that should never happen. But if it did, what Price Anderson would or would not do under that, I'll have to talk to some folks to get you a better answer on it.
Am I allowed to ask what she was going to say? Well, that's your job. I'm asking you.
Now the lawyer in the room can talk to it. I
Well,
don't
the
know.
retired, Mary Weber Cap, the retired, and that's what it was limited to.
They limited it to just that.
That's, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I figured it was a slippery slope, and corporations are people now.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Did
Any
I
other
answer your
conversation
question?
on this topic?
Okay.
So, Michael, I'm glad you brought your A game tonight, 'cause,
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't want to have to answer some of the stuff we just came up with. But it was nonetheless very good conversation. Does anyone have any thought-provoking ideas as to recommendations coming out of this? I'm not really coming up with any myself, so. Joyce?
Underwood Cab. I think there's some validity to what you said at the beginning, now that I have a better understanding of what the heck we're talking about.
So looking for some sort of report summary on the contractor's performance?
Yeah, because I think that there could be stuff done with that information.
Okay. So
I don't know what
to,
yet,
to
but-
carry that thought forward, I mean, if you want to mull that over, and you can obviously drop any or all of us an email to see where we can take it.
Does that mean I have to
Because we're not
write
going to
it?
draft it tonight, but
Does that mean I have to write it?
not necessarily. I mean, if you assist,
Okay.
I mean,
I'll think
it's-
about it.
So, Mike Michelanski, my advice, and this is purely advice, I'm not telling you what you can or cannot do. This subject is not on the work plan per se. And rather than writing a recommendation on it, because I'm not sure exactly what your recommendation or thoughts are on it, it would probably be more productive that if there are some things you wanted to propose that you look at and provide a point to give the department to do something differently, you are thinking of a recommended area that you want to look at. So maybe what you're talking about is formulating a topical area for your next year's work plan. And this would be about the right time to do it. We're midway through coming up to 3/4 of the way through the year, and it won't be too long before we get to do this. So that would be my advice to you.
Mary Weber Cab, Michael, that's a very good point, and that relates to what Joyce brought up at our last full board meeting, which I remember I brought up at a full board meeting in Savannah maybe a year ago, which related to, well, it wasn't this specific committee, it was the committee that you had, where we want to not just, if we have a position that we feel very strongly about, we'll write a recommendation, but is to work more closely with you in terms of what do you want as a community, our opinion on. And I think that that's a very important feedback for us to get as a CAB, because we get all this information and we might not be able to see, you know, clearly through all the raw data that we're getting. But I think it's really important for us as a CAB in every single committee, not just representatives of the public, what's your opinion on this?
So,
And I know you've said that there are a lot of situations, and with the other CABs, where the CAB, there just might not be situations where we can give an opinion on something, or the DOE doesn't need our advice. But I think it's really important for us to have guidance on what do you want our opinion about? And for us to go back to our communities and say, what's your opinion about this? We need, just in general, I think we need a little bit more of that. Like, what do you want to hear from us on?
so Mike Michelanis, DOE, and Dan and Dave, if you're okay, we're kind of a little bit off the agenda topic here, but I think this is a really good point to discuss. And
Actually, we're not really off topic, because even just developing any recommendation on this, if you look at our work plan, look at all the different areas this crosses over. DOESR budget and process.
what I
EM
meant,
performance metrics.
what I meant to say, where I was about to take you, is going to go a little bit away from here, because Mary, you make some excellent points, because in the past, you've heard in the executive committee meetings and even in some of our meetings here, the DDFOs have had to say, hey, there's a line between oversight and what the CAB does, and we don't want you to get into oversight. Now, on the flip side of that coin, it does not mean that you guys just have to sit there and only look at a list that DOE formulates in some kind of the public's perspective. We grab different demographics, geographical, demographic, things like that, to try and get a representative perspective on this CAB. So when you guys think of something you want to go look at, or think, hey, you know, we have some energy on this, we might be able to, we think we could possibly give you some advice, this is where you go into sales mode. And that's what I was proposing you might do. This is where you go and say, okay, formulate what your proposal idea is, and bring that to the meeting that we have in, what is it, February, when we do the work plan?
February work plan.
We do the work plan in February. Mature out some of the kind of a concept. When you all came up with the pension one, that was in the middle of the year. It was pretty pressing. There were lots of stuff going on with appropriations, et cetera. And Gil felt pretty strongly that we needed to move on that. We didn't want to wait till the normal cycle goes. And the DDFOs listened. We went back and talked to the managers who'd have to say, yes, we want to get into that. And they said, wow, we never thought of that. Yeah, let's see what they come up with. And then we created it. So yeah, we will do those kinds of things. We recognize that if it was just left up to the department to say, these are the topics and only the topics we ever want to hear from you on, we've got a huge blind spot behind us that we don't know what we don't know, or what we might need advice on. So yes, we welcome your thoughts on it. Doesn't mean that every single thing that you have energy on or passion on, because I'm not looking to make scientists out of you to help me solve the mercury formulation problem in the A3H evaporator, for example. But maybe we'd want to understand, well, what does the public know about what's going on in 3H, because it's been in the news, and okay, how comfortable are you with what we're doing? Oftentimes when we present things to you for informational basis only, or when you say you want it for information, not getting a reaction or not getting a recommendation out of you is the feedback we're looking for. That, because that tells us, okay, yeah, the public, the public is kind of comfortable with what we're doing. We're not asking for you to endorse it, but the fact that you didn't feel strongly enough to go make a recommendation tells us, okay, if we were bringing you along as a partner on this thing, we'd be walking arm in arm at least, or at least along the same path. So that's kind of the way. After, well, how many years have I been doing this now, James? Am I in my 4th year?
I think so, somewhere there, yeah.
So it's taken me 4 years to really understand this. The first 2 years I did not fully comprehend the DDFO responsibilities and how I could facilitate what you do with what the needs are of the line managers. But I've finally been able to think through and hash this well enough to explain it. I hope what I just said was comprehensible. I don't see too many blank stares, but did what I say make sense? Nobody's running around with their hair on fire, so I don't think I annoyed or antagonized anybody. What kind of reaction? You guys are like looking at a mirror here. It's like, give me some feedback. I think I saw this in a movie once.
So, Mike, I did have it on my agenda, some of the blanks I had, that I was going to wrap up our committee discussion and then point it back to DOE, because we had talked about this in the executive committee and even offline from that it's, if they're specific to us to figure it out, and in some cases it's pretty crystal clear, hey, what do you think about this subject? What does the public perceive? What information would be good to broadcast? Where are we, dropping the ball from a PR standpoint? Whatever it may be, I think if we take that further and have the presenters literally sum up, we would love recommendations on point. I don't think that's out of anything extraordinary, nor is it inappropriate. I think it's helps guide the board. We have a lot of rules to follow, and if we can point us to have more productive conversations in these committee meetings and really total that up to good recommendations back to DOE, we all win.
Dan, Mike McLean's DOE. Dan, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and why don't we add this to our dry runs? It can just be a question we ask of the presenters as they prepare and dry run it. We can ask topically, was there anything that we wanted to focus the CAB's attention on for looking at tough and giving us their thoughts? I hesitate to use the word recommendation, because then it almost looks like we're telling you what we want, and it's up to you whether you feel strongly enough to write a recommendation on it. But you're right.
So I mean, this committee has, sorry to interrupt you, this committee has 2 presentations coming up in September that they don't currently have funding for. That would be something that, hey, what do you guys think? Is it of value to the EM mission to do thus and so? And I think that's a natural conversation to say, these are the things you guys are mulling around behind the scenes. In the last committee meeting, we learned of the thousands of milestones that were achieved, yet we don't hear about all those little ones. We hear about the big hitters, but we don't get involved in the little stuff. So maybe it's time we are a little more involved on a couple of those topics.
And just to piggyback on all that, if a presenter does leave it out, if they don't say, here's what's next, then I think that's the fair question. That's a fair question to ask them. Say, you've given us this information, great. What do we do with it? And that's a fair question to ask the presenters that come in. If you hear something and you don't know what comes next, then maybe that's an issue.
Yeah, Mike Michelangelo, Steve, it'd actually be kind of fun to watch the expressions of some of the presenters if you had asked them that. Okay, so what do you want us to pay attention to? I can just picture a couple of them going, what do you want us to do with this information? What do you want us to focus on? Because that's a fair question, and we did listen. We heard, Joyce, the point that the debate and the discussion y'all had at the last full meeting over the facilities, the scope of the facilities committee. That really intrigued the site manager. Mike and I talked on a break, and after the CAF full board meeting was done, on okay, whether you guys collapse it from 4 committees to 3 committees or keep it at 4, regardless of that, he started to go. He had a streaming moment where okay, a lot of ideas of things that, hey, these are some things I'd like to hear with the public once, we should do. So that means we're going to have to prep you up with some information that now you work, if you're working from the point of what it is we'd like to have your thoughts on, we're going to have to, you don't have to be a nuclear scientist to prioritize what do we want, what does the local community want us to focus on first. We'll worry about it from the mission perspective, but what does the community think? How would the community advise us? That had Mike's interest. So yeah, we are listening to you. We hadn't thought of doing that, and that's something that was of interest. And he had a couple other things. I took notes on it, which I've killed those brain cells with at least a month's worth of aging. So I already had a first discussion with Avery tonight on that, and we're going to meet next week to go over what Mike and I had talked about, so she can take it back to her manager, and we can look at it, whether you choose to keep the fourth committee or whether you integrate it or whether we change its name or what have you. We're thinking along parallel lines, and once you've matured, you're thinking a little bit more. We'll be able to sync up with you sometime.
The updates prior to the meetings, but like example for today, we have no update. So, I mean, is it really a problem for us to get those?
So
prior
just
to the
discussing that before he answers, I had also thought about that. I did not have it on my agenda for this committee to discuss, but some of the thoughts I did have on it, I understand that you have to go through a vetting process of what you can physically hand out and print. Is it something that could be at least the structure of it on the screen? Because the problem is for me as an individual, the way I'm wired, you're giving me a lot of verbal information, and I'm frantically trying to take crib notes. And some of the presenters and the facility contacts can speak quite quickly. Maxine, not to name names. But that being said, it is difficult to digest something that is not your natural language. And for several of us who have never worked at the site, it can be drinking from the fire hose for 5 minutes, and it's like, what did they say? I think I caught one point out of the whole thing.
So, Mike Michelanis again. I'll manage expectations. I don't think even putting it up on a screen is likely to occur, and because it's a very sensitive topic. However, that being said, I can certainly control.
Every one of us have different quirks when we talk in front of a group, and in her particular case, her voice speeds up.
And I can help her slow down, because if she's going to work with the public, when I was younger, I talked very fast. I had to work to slow down. I'm hyperactive. I'm ADHD by nature. I talk very quickly, and my mind thinks even faster than my mouth operated at the time. And sometimes I would leap ahead because my mouth couldn't catch up. You have to learn that. I will teach her. This is part of her developmental things too. If she is talking faster than you guys can assimilate it in an update, we can work with the points of contact to help them develop that skill, because it's an important one to get, whether you're doing a CAB or a public meeting for a NEPA action or what have you. It's important for our staff to learn these skills.
So when we have the site, the overview for the entire site by the site manager, obviously we've got time, and you've gone through the vetting process, and you're able to get some of it. And he has many speaking points that are beyond what he has written down, which is perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
Having that shell, though, you can quickly jot a quick couple of words to get back during the Q&A to talk about it. And so if you can't put it all in writing, can you at least give us a skeleton when you're going to talk about the whatever evaporator coil, and then, so I'm sure it would be perfectly acceptable to have a bulleted list of what's going to be discussed, and if you had evaporator coil leak, you're not blowing any secrets there by just saying that, but at least for you're going to miss the next 3 points. And so I'm kind of just looking for some help there, because I catch myself in it from time to time, and I am not one of those people who like to ask people to repeat themselves several times.
Okay, no, I get Mike Michelanis, Dewey. I get it, and now I don't know what is perfectly acceptable or not. I have to go back and talk to the public affairs folks and how much effort it takes to go, if we doing it for the full board meetings doesn't happen very often. We roll it up, as you said, at a high level. Doing it for 4 committees will multiply the load by at least fourfold. And what sensitivities there are, I will make this much of a commitment. I will go back and talk to Amy Boyette about the feasibility of it, and Jim and I will look at whether we can be helpful with it. If we can't provide a framework for that, or even put it on the screen for you, then at least we will work with our points of contact to make sure.
I haven't discussed this with any of the committee members, but from the public's point of view, if you can stand there and say it, and I can take the YouTube video of this and replay it until I get every word down, what is the difference between giving me it on a printed sheet and having someone up here reading it to me?
Mike Michelanis, DOE, I had that exact discussion with the folks who make these decisions, and I'm not going to be able to give you an answer that makes any sense. You're asking me to rationalize basically political sensitivity into
It's City Hall.
It's not, politics and common sense don't always 100% overlap. So I can't explain. You're right. You could play it on YouTube over and over again until you knew exactly what the words are, but there seems to be a different level of sensitivity between the spoken word and the written word. So, and why that is, I haven't got an answer that I could come back to you and explain in rational terms.
For instance, we went last week and asked, how about after the meeting? What can we give them after the meeting? Can we post it?
I want to manage your expectations, because believe me, I would love to say, oh yeah, sure, I'll make that happen. But I know if I go back, this is a sensitive topic, because you do start overlapping into politics. You start dealing with some of the news, some of the things that we talk about. I mean, the weapons complex monitor and Tom Clemens' group and others will listen to these things, and it can sometimes make the news. And headquarters understands that. The cabs are here for a public discourse dialogue of the issues, but there seems to be more sensitivity on their part if there's something written down and put out that way. And I'm not a public affairs kind of person or a politician, so I just can't explain it to you. I know there's a reason for it, because the people who make those decisions, they're not arbitrary about it. They're very crystal clear and consistent.
DOE
I
is
just
not
can't
that
explain
far
it.
off from corporate America either, so
And you're
they
right.
have the same PR type screenings and everything like
There's
that.
politics associated with the corporate. It's not
Absolutely.
politics, I'm thinking political process system. It's politics in terms of public perception and sensitivities and things like that. Thank you for that clarification.
This is Deidre Lloyd with EPA. I just wanted to chime in a little bit as another federal entity.
Oh, thank you.
Do you happen to be a lawyer?
We struggle with it every day. And anything written has increased scrutiny at higher levels, and there's less information put out. So, and I echo what Michael says, that I'm not sure why. I don't understand it oftentimes either, but that's the culture we're working in right now.
Agreed.
I apologize.
And Mike Michelanis, DOE, and she's saying what I'm thinking as well, that it's not the culture necessarily of just this particular administration. This has been like this across administrations.
Yep.
It's like you said, it's the sensitivity to how the public will react in managing a message that out in the public area as opposed to the internal. And there's always a little more, when it gets written down, there's a lot more management attention.
Most churches these days have like the little notes pre-populated and lots of blanks for you to fill in. If you'd like to go to my church, you can check it out, see how you
Yep.
could do it.
Mine does
If
the
you
same.
take the statement and redact everything and take those redactions and fill in the blanks, that would be helpful. But anyway, Doug.
I'm not trying to, Doug Howard Cab, to beat a dead horse or mule to death, but
You have to be of my generation to understand what that meant. I hope everybody watches the reruns.
so that I fully understand, it's the fact that
Mr. Ed.
the information is fresh, or it has to be looked at and reviewed before we can get it So it's, I guess it's a time consuming task, or it's the fact that we just don't have that that time to get it blessed off by those that are going to review it and in our hands. Is that what it is, or?
Mike Michelangelo, Steve, we should have called this agenda item "A Night with the DDFO." So no, it's not as simple or as clear cut as it just. There's not enough time to look at the fresh things. There are looking and thinking about, okay, well, how might this be used? How might it be misunderstood? How might it be misconstrued? And that takes a lot of energy and resources to go think through all those things. And many times the natural inclination is, look, there's a lot of things, a lot of priorities for our folks to be looking at and working on. That's not a subject I want to go think through. It doesn't warrant, there's no requirement out there for the public to release it, and I don't want to have a public debate about the particular subject. So I think that's more the mindset of why there is a decision to, there's probably 2 or 3 other dimensions that the folks that I've talked to just haven't been able to pound into my head yet. It's not a simple one-faceted concern, it's multifaceted. It's not simple as, well, it just takes too long to get all the reviews and approvals to keep the information fresh. It's not that simple. For a minute there, I thought you were going to get that I pinched you on that. So, are you okay? You understand what I'm saying? Did I hit a hot button or something?
Doug Howard Cab, I wish I could say I fully understand.
I wish I could too, Doug.
And being in the military, I know about receiving information and getting information, but still, when they get up there and give that update, they're talking either off paper or out of their heads. So that information they give us, we could take it anywhere we want and talk about it, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm still not getting why it can't be given to us on paper. And it is something that, hey, all you got to do is say, hey, this is the way it is, and I'm good,
So, Mike Michelangelo, what I was just describing isn't why you can't have a particular on paper. I was describing the mindset of why share with the public is clear, it's understood, and it's saying what we really intended it to go say. And that takes a bit of resources to go make happen. And managing the message is just as important as sharing it. So, because of the level of effort it takes to manage that message, there's a lot of it managed. There's a lot of reviews that occur, and at a higher level, and that it will be very difficult to do that as frequently as the full board meetings, which pretty much cuts across all the committees anyway, and then 4 more times every 2 months for the individual committees, which would be 4 different deliverables, and in some cases the message is reviewed outside the department, because I don't share it with anybody. I share it with my counterpart up at headquarters, the public affairs folks and the DFO, and who they work with. I know OMB was interested at one point in time, but yeah, it becomes part of making sure that we are managing the message that we're sharing with the public whether it's a public meeting or. There's a lot of work that goes to preparing the manager for the full board meetings. It's not just a couple of us yahoos writing down some notes and then it gets put on a piece of paper and he reads it.
Yep.
There's a lot of back and forth with the manager's office, a lot of time and energy between the public affairs folks and the line managers like myself as we craft, okay, these are the topics that we think the CAB ought to be aware of.
So trying to wrap up this topic,
I'm sorry,
Betty,
I
did
got
you
a
have
letter.
Been up long.
you sure?
I said that knowledge she has, and I know absolutely nothing I'm new, but it's just real informative to me, and I realize that has a lot of knowledge, and it shows. But people will take things out of text, maybe that's not in this room, but if we walked out of here with something written down and somebody else looked at it, sometimes they take things out of text. That's human nature, and that I agree. Thank you very much.
Joyce.
Joyce Underwood, Cab. Just first a clarification. This includes Jim Folk, that's the new guy's name, right?
No, Mike Budney is the new site manager.
Oh, what did I get?
Jim
Jim
Folk
Folk's
is,
your
Jim
other
Folk is
person.
my counterpart
Okay,
for
so
liquid
Mike
waste.
Budney, this includes his manager's degree, but the crucible, right? The guy said, okay, fine, I'm a witch, I don't want to hang. And then they said, well, write your name down. And he says, no, I won't do it. And they hung him because he wouldn't write his name on it. It's like this document, right? It says Department of Energy, Office of Environmental Management. So all those people are accountable for what's in here. Plus her name is on it, so she's accountable for what's in here.
You get it.
Huh?
You get it.
I get it. I totally get it. But if Avery comes up and speaks her piece, Avery said it, but they can't really pin anybody else, you know. And I understand, like, whenever you're giving these updates, everything's in flux, so they're subject to change. Whenever you put them down on paper, now they are there for their duration, and everything's kind of fluid as the updates are happening, I guess. And I feel like the only reason that you would want to put something on paper is if it was
Stimulating conversation. It's a very interesting topic, don't get me wrong, but I think we've not only killed this horse, kicked it, we've taken its mane and made some bows and stuff for our violins, and I think it's time to move on. So this leads us into any additional committee discussion on any topics we may have. As was discussed earlier, the work plan. Please, everybody on this committee, you know, take a little extra care as to what's on the work plan and what you want to see on it next year. I was looking to refrain from making an announcement early, but this will be my last tour of duty on the cab, so I'll be finishing up in January. It just becomes, being said, I won't be here come February, but I certainly would like to assist those who are interested in staying on this committee to have a nice, smooth transition and go into a very meaningful work plan for 2019. So those who needed to escape a little early this evening will miss that one, so we'll see if they pick it up through the rumor mill. So that, without any other committee discussion, I didn't see anybody's eyes light up, but is there any public comment? Anyone online?